the 9 Phases of Marriage. She has also taught courses about women for many years. It's a great pleasure to introduce her tonight as a speaker. And something I did not know before this evening about Susan is she has published 18 books. That's a lot of books, folks. And most of them are good, right, Susan? Come.
Thank you, Lois.
Okay.
So,
Don't worry about the mic.
okay, I won't. Can everyone hear me? I'll
Yeah,
do my
yes.
best. So, I just want to say something about Louis, who is very dear to me. I know Louis several ways. Microphone? Do you need it? Maybe you can try. Let's see.
Remember, my wife is here too.
I was just going to say that I know Louis through his wife.
No, please
I don't
don't
think
do
we
that.
can do it. We have to turn it off. I'll shout. Okay, so I know Louis through Alana, and then I know Louis through Marymount, because the Writing Center used to be at Marymount, and we used to see each other a lot, and that was really great fun. Excuse me. And then he's run this gorgeous writing center with a lot of illustrious writers, so I'm really flattered to be here tonight. And right before we started, Louis said to me, talk about whatever you want, Susan, after I had gathered my notes together today. And you don't have to talk about your new book, but I want to talk about it a little bit. And first I want to say that I've been investigating how women in contemporary American culture have been positioned since I was a little girl, and I watched my mother and my aunts, who were just fantastic, and then I watched my father and the uncles, and no comment. And I saw how much power they had and how much power they didn't have. And I remember thinking that won't be for me. But I wanted to know why the women had to navigate a path. And so every nonfiction book that I've written, and this is my 14th nonfiction book, but I've written 4 novels. So I went back to nonfiction after the 4 novels in the past 10 years. I wanted to see that book in the bookstore. So we'll start with my book on mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law. So I'm 23 years old, and I'm getting married, and I really need a book on mothers-in-law. And I go to Barnes & Noble, I go everywhere, there is nothing. So I waited, but after 3 children and the same mother-in-law, I wrote the book. And for all of my nonfiction, I've interviewed for each book, 150 to 200 women, and I usually do a questionnaire at the end. So for this new book, 150 women, and then a questionnaire of 111 women at the end. And the template is always the same in the sense that I interview a very diverse group. So in this book, they're 20 to 80 in age. But what I'm looking at is diversity in terms of race, religion, level of education, all across the country, social strata, and from big cities, from rural areas, suburbs, all of it. And what's so fascinating to me is that whatever level of education, whatever amount of money earned, the emotional longing for women is always the same. We've been taught, because we're told and taught a lot as females in a patriarchal society, that we want the glittering goods, but we do. We do partly by nature. I feel like I'm in my gender class, Louis. Partly by nature and partly
Excuse me, Susan. Can you all hear her?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Okay, good.
And partly by nurture. So nature is who we are individually, and then the nurture is the societal messaging and prescription that comes at us all the time. So I'll tell you some of my other titles and you'll understand. So because I've always been a second wife, I will never be a first wife. I wanted a book on second wives when I was very young too, and I couldn't find one. So I've written 3 books on the role of wife in America. One on, remarriage, being a second wife. Now I could do it for third wives too. We live longer and remarry always, it seems. And a book, my most academic book is called The New Wife, The Evolving Role of the American Wife. And that came out in the early 2000s, but I looked at the last 5 decades of wifing, from the 50s, 60s, and that's how I categorize the wives. which was just really fascinating to learn. And then I did a book on female infidelity. That was my first book, and that came out in when I was in my 30s. And I remember telling the husband at the time that I was going to do that, and he said, "No, you're not." And it was probably the first time I ever said, "Well, actually, yes, I am." Because I so wanted to learn about it. And what got my interest? What sparked my interest? So we were living in Connecticut. I'm really a young mother with 3 young kids, and I escaped to the city, and I'm on the commuter train. And I'm listening. I love to eavesdrop when women are talking because you learn so much. So I'm listening to these women who were in their 20s, and there were 4 of them. They were like putting on their eyeliner and makeup and getting ready to get to their jobs, and they were commuters. And one of them was getting married in 2 weeks, and she was confessing that she was still seeing her old boyfriend. And then when I got to the lunch, the birthday lunch for my friends, and that's why I was going in that day, a few of them were saying, I have a friend who has a friend who's having an affair. And I thought, wow, I had written for the school paper in college, and I had my MFA in creative writing, and I really wanted to know more. So that began it. But you'd think that was my most incendiary book, except the most provocative book I ever did was the book that came out much later. Oh, but The End of A Passion for More, the book about female infidelity, it was published 3 times. I just kept, the internet changed affairs. They made it even more available. And 2 years ago, it was an iHeart podcast. So it really did very well. And so the book that was most provocative, where I got emails from women saying, "Why did you out us? How could you?" was my book that I wrote about why women keep secrets and lie for the cause. And that circles back to how women are positioned in society. We are acrobatic, and we are survivors, and we do whatever we need to do. So my life's work has been to investigate how women really feel versus the faces that they wear. I'll just name a few more of my nonfiction titles, and then I'll tell you a little about Estranged. So I did a book, my first book on female friendship is called Toxic Friends. Louis, we did an event at Marymount for that. That was in the I think that was 2008. I looked at mothers and daughters. That book is called You're Grounded Forever, but first let's go shopping. I did a book on sisters called Sisters Devoted or Divided. And I did the book that I guess came out that did not do well, and to this day, and I know someone in this room will agree, is really a sore topic, although I really believed in it, was called Women of Divorce, Mothers, Daughters, Stepdaughters, the New Triangle. And afterward, I applied what the publishers always say to you, which is, now tell me, who will read this book? If you are a stepmother, you don't want it, and if you're the mother, you don't want it, and if you're the daughter/stepdaughter, you don't want it. So I guess I should have thought of that. But really researching it was, again, fascinating to me because I always want to know how women really feel. So that brings us to this book. So Estranged. I started this book 7 years ago. My beloved mother had died, and it was a time when I really saw who were my true friends and who were not. And what was so upsetting was that a lot of friends disappointed me and a lot of friends surprised me by being there. It wasn't really what I thought it would be. So I pitched it to my agent, and she said, "Intriguing, Susan, but you're under contract for 3 novels. The Palm Beach novels were due." So when I went back to it after the 3 novels came out 2 years ago, I had interviewed 25 women in order to tell Alice about my agent about it. So when I first interviewed the women 7 years ago, they said, "I wish I could estrange. In my dreams, I leave a really toxic friend, a really bad friend. I don't have the guts. I'll be pushed out from the group. I feel like a failure that I'm so unhappy with this friend. I would hurt her feelings even though she's done really reprehensible things." All of these reasons why women wanted to estrange but were struggling to do it. Then COVID came, And then the Me Too movement really changed our way of looking at the world, and women finally had more voice. And women each year, if we think of like our daughters and younger women, have more agency. And so by the time I went back to research it 2 years ago, I was hearing really different stories. And what I heard that really surprised me was how many women of all ages said, I feel better and stronger because I estranged from this friend. And that really was very different. And what we're taught, you know, again, the societal prescription is when life gets hard, we depend on our female friends. They will be there when the men come and go, the partners come and go, jobs come and go, children grow up or break our hearts or do both, but we always have our female friends. But what if they sabotage instead of support us? So that became really the thesis of this. And who has the courage to walk away? So when I listen to the women, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I want to tell you that I've been touring around, and women keep saying to me, well, is it different when you're 30 than 50? And one of the surprises of my research is that no, it's not. Because, oh, that's another book I did. I wrote a book called Reclaiming Ourselves, How Women Dispel a Legacy of Bad Choices. And in that research, that book came out like in 2000. But in that book, women kept saying that they were waking up and really owning these relationships. And I thought about that a lot, but always with that template of the good girl and pleasers. So to hear women say at all ages, I can finally leave a friend and I'll be okay. And I bet you, let me ask, how many people in this room have had an unhappy female friendship? That's why I wrote the book. Right. But less second guessing them. You know, when I first talked to the women, because I always ask the same questions, 7 years ago, the women really were second guessing themselves and saying, you know, maybe I did something wrong. What did I do? I keep thinking about the last time I saw her. And so I really looked at how it can empower us to go forward. And that's what I heard this time. So here are my stats. And this is based on the 150 interviews and then the 111 women who answered my questionnaire. So 88% of the women said that they had had a problem with a close friend. And 75%, this is my favorite statistic because I think it so underscores what we are allowed to do and not allowed to do in our culture. 75% of the women said it's easier to leave a romantic relationship or an unhappy marriage than an unhappy friendship. Wow. Yeah, really striking, right? That they felt so beholden. Because even if we give tacit consent to divorce, and we understand widowhood, you know, we understand how women end up in a very different place than they expected, we know it, and we've seen it, and it's part of our experience. But to say that you don't talk to a female friend feels very much like a judgment. 61% of the women told me that they felt a friend had done something really terrible to them, and 63% said that they had a friend who had broken up with them. And 75% said this is a very new stat from the first time, felt relieved leaving, and 79% said that they felt positive about estranging. So that was really interesting. What I wanted to also talk about is the types of friends. So after listening to all of the women and then getting the questionnaire, the categories that became my chapters fell into place. I have a chapter called The Faithless Friend, and that's when we are fine. It's going along fine, and then either you meet someone new, a partner or a new friend who's very important to you, and suddenly it's a triangle, and someone in the mix doesn't like the friend, your dearest friend. And so that's very painful. The wayward friend. My editor at first didn't think I should put this in the book, but it was so important to me. And this is when you're really, really friends historically, and you're very invested in each other, and you trust each other, except one of the friends has an addiction. And this really happens a lot more than we think. And so, I don't know, alcohol, drug use, gambling, and you're the enabler. So I really looked into that. I looked into a kind of friend that we all know very well, and that's the green-eyed friend. You know, where you're afraid to tell her your good news, but she's supposedly your closest friend. So I looked at that. I looked at the thieving friend, a friend who will really betray you, and betrayal is such a big issue for women. And so she'll take maybe, for young women, the boyfriend. The younger women talked about a friend seducing a fiance. But they'll also take your idea, like best friends at work who end up saying, I told her what I was going to tell, you know, the group the next day, and then she pretended it was her idea. So think of Working Girl, remember when that happened, but they weren't best friends. And I also looked at a very new type of friend where we're diametrically opposed. And this is a reflection of the last 2 elections and actually also vaccinating and immunizing children. So everyone in every age group talked about that. And since I mentioned my mother, she'd be so happy about tonight, one of the last things she said to me before she died, besides that her hair looked thin, was that she couldn't believe I was friendly with 2 of my best friends since our kids were little, and my kids are very old, because they had voted differently. And she said, I don't know how you could be friends. And I said, but Mom, we have a whole history. But the idea that then there were all these articles about families at Thanksgiving where you have to put, you know, people at different, and then friends who were breaking up. And because I do a lot of research for my books, I looked at a lot of, Psychology Today had a few essays, and The Atlantic had a lot about how people are no longer friends because of their beliefs. And we all know that didn't happen until recently, until the last 2 elections. And then younger women, particularly women who were teachers or they were in the medical field, said to me that they had broken up with their best friend because their best friend would not get their kids immunized. And they said, but we're in schools, we see what happens, or we see how sick the kids get, or we're in the medical field. So really like a line in the sand. And then I looked at 4 hard truths in this book, and the women started to talk about how ill they felt, physically ill, and their mental health when these friendships weren't going well. And that was really staggering, and how women avoid conflict. So on my book tour, I've been asked a lot, how do women break up? And they don't break up easily. I have a whole section on ghosting because we don't like conflict. And also there's no like paradigm, there's no model for leaving a really good friend. And that, like, we don't hear about friend therapy really, but we do hear about marriage therapy and couples therapy. And then the emotional trauma, another hard truth that came out of my study of leaving a friend and breaking up. And then why it becomes a necessary act to estrange. And so I look at the estranger, the person who instigates the estrangement, and the estrangee, the person at the receiving end. And 2 other things happened in shaping this book. One was that my editor said to me, can you get both sides of the story? We're all sitting here thinking, how could you possibly get 2 estranged friends to speak? But for each chapter, I got 1 story. And those are the longer stories, and they were so dramatic and so heartfelt. And they fit into each of the categories. And a lot of them were uneven at the end. Like there's one in particular, it's Helen and Gabriella. They were very interesting women. They had gotten here from Antigua. They represented what I look at in this book also, which I call fictive family, where because their parents were left in Antigua and their siblings for the most part, they created their own community. They got here in the 80s, maybe late 80s, early 90s. They were very close, and they kept telling me that people thought they were sisters. They did everything together, and in the end they had a terrible breakup. And I asked them both for each of this. She said, where I got both sides. I said, how do you feel about it? And Helen said, I paraphrased because you have to read the book, but she said something like, she was great, but no, never again. And Gabriella said, I just wish I could see her. And that's real heartache, that's really tremendous loss. And the women really grieve. It's not like you estrange and you just go out and party. This is tremendous loss. If life is a pie for women, these friendships are a big piece, and we really care about it and want it to work out. So I also looked at I also looked at the women who felt like being the estrangee was okay. Like they finally searched and said, maybe I did the wrong thing. Maybe we should just not be together anymore. And then I also asked my editor if I could have one sister story per chapter, even though this is a book about friendship. And I wanted to do that because I told you, I think I had written a book also on sisters years ago, one of my first books called Sisters Devoted or Divided. And in that study, all the women kept saying to me, the ones who were no longer speaking, I'm now looking for friends to fill the void, who could be as close. But for the sisters, even just a dyad, sometimes more, sometimes like 3 or 4 sisters, if the sisters were close, they said, I don't need my friends the way that, my friends who don't have a sister, like our sisters do. And then the women kept saying, like Helen and Gabriella in the book, oh, everyone thinks we're sisters. We were always mistaken for sisters. We were like sisters. So I put sisters in the book. And what distinguishes the sisters interviews from the others is that we all know that family is assigned to us and our friends are chosen. So because we choose our friends, we actually hold the bar even higher. Whereas family, what plays out is the mother saying, but this is your sister. Whatever happens, you're sisters. So those breakups have a different, it's very enmeshed in the family, what happens and how it works out. But this goes back to fictive family. So fictive family, we choose, we create, and it's even more devastating. A good example in our culture, I know everyone here has watched Sex and the City. So except for one mother-in-law, and Ann Mira played Miranda's very unwelcomed mother-in-law, there were no family members, if you think about it. And they would sit at that table and they would really care for each other in a way, despite tensions and disagreements, and not being on the same path, because women love to mirror each other, and that's part of my study, how we have to reflect each other. So friends at different stages of our lives. And they were really there for each other. However, because my book, Tripping the Prom Queen, is about female rivalry, I think that there's a great example in Sex and the City of how we all as women in this culture live in a world of limited goods, not enough pie. And how it really, that's why they're thieving friends, and that's why they're our green-eyed friends. Because we're pitted against each other, we're only compared to each other. So there's one scene in Sex and the City where Miranda unexpectedly is pregnant, and she announces it at one of their meals. And Charlotte, who's been going through in vitro and trying and really struggling, says, no, that's my baby, or something like that. And that epitomizes what friends are set up to do, and how we have to break that pattern. We can't compete and feel like if she gets it, I can't have it. So that's reflected in, this study and also in Tripping the Prom Queen. So I saw a lot of that. And I don't know, Louis, do we have more, maybe go into some questions?
Oh, are we ready for questions?
It's up to you, I don't know.
Of course. I'll open it up to...
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, I think I've talked about the book a little, so. Any questions?
Someone must have a question.
Any comments? Yes?
Thank you for your presentation. It was fascinating. I wondered if you had run across any situations where one of the, someone wants to estrange from the friend, but other female friends are lobbying to keep the friendship going. Is that something that is that a common phenomenon that's
Can
Yes.
you repeat the question,
So,
Susan?
so the question is, have I come across a situation where a friend really wants to meet the friend and the mutual friends, right? The mutual friends are lobbying for it. And I'm really glad you asked that because I didn't mention that why women don't want to estrange. And part of it is because women really yearn to belong. And that goes right to fictive family. And there are many groups, and within the group is almost hierarchy. Like we could be best friends, but we're in a group, and everyone knows we're best friends, but we're in the group. So estranging is a great risk, even if you and that friend are no longer doing well and something egregious has happened, because the group doesn't want it. In a few interviews, the group fell apart afterward. Women in their 50s, it's almost like they're waking up. A lot of women in their 50s talked about how the repercussions of leaving the group were so severe. And women really think about it. You know, can I take this risk with this friend and then jeopardize my status? And who will take her side and who will take my side? So women don't like that. And that's why I think I mentioned there's a lot of ghosting. I didn't find women sitting down and saying, oh, we should try to work this out like we're taught to do with a romantic relationship or like a future ex-husband or something. So it's not like that. We're raised as good girls and pleasers. That's been at the heart of my life's work, to be a good girl. And pleasers don't break up, they don't leave. Plus we've been told we're best friends forever. So that's part of it. And by the way, all those years I taught at Marymount, and before Uber, when you can never get a cab, I took the bus down Lexington to get to the college, and I took the bus up 3rd Avenue to get home. And I would say that this was an incredible coincidence that one day, because remember I told you I always like to listen to what women are saying, there were 2 women on the bus on the way down saying, can you believe she did that to me about a mutual friend? But on the way back, 2 women were saying, what would I do without my friends? What would I do without my girlfriends? And that's the rub. We don't know where, it was perfect because what happens in between, and this is not a study of, just what was called in the New York Times, and I referenced it recently, there was an article. In fact, my book was in production, and I said to my editor, no, I have to add this. There was an article on the medium friend. Laura Metchling wrote it, I think, but I don't know. I'll have to look in the references. And what she wrote about was, what do we do with our medium friends?
What is a medium friend?
A medium friend, now this is, her interpretation. Maybe she even created it, but this is her interpretation, and she's reporting. And she interviewed people, men too, it wasn't just women. And those are your friends who you enjoy, but you don't really bare your soul to, or you'll meet them for something, but mostly because it's a common interest. And you'll go maybe months without seeing them and then have lunch and be happy. But it's not it's not the intimacy. This book is about our most intimate friends, what my mother would call her closest friends. And I was taught to call my best friends. And so it's very different. Women hold the bar so high in every relationship. When I did the 3 studies on the role of wife, the women basically said, I want my husband to be my best friend, my lover, and my provider, even though I happen to earn like twice what he earns. This is what I want. And so if we hold the bar that high in these romantic relationships, and we think that our best friend, female friends, are the answer when everything else fails, we know how high we're holding the bar. Something else in the study that I want to mention, and that is there are 2 ways that these friendships fail, and estrangement becomes the answer. One is cumulative. So I have a chapter, I don't think I mentioned it, called The Disparaging Friend, where she's really critical, she's hierarchical. A friend who lies, lying is a big deal. So a few women their friend was outed, like the friend canceled plans, and then she just made another plan and happened to run into the friend who said she had COVID or something, and there she is out with her new, fancier friends. So that's really, really hurtful. So, and criticism is very hard to take. not feeling respected, another chapter. On the flippant friend, respect, so important for women. Not that they would sit down and say, my friend doesn't respect me, as, you know, right away, but over time, when there's a lack of respect and equality, because, you know, in this culture, we're not paid equal pay for equal work. So equality, right, and it's a capitalistic culture, so that filters down to everything. So it really plays out. We want equality in our relationships, and we really expect it from our female friends.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
To have equality,
Yeah.
have to have it, or else the friendship, if it feels like she's more important, or what she, you know, there's not enough give and take that's measured almost
I
equally.
would expect a friendship would be about equality, even though it may veer one way or the other at different times. But,
It's so necessary.
well, I just think it's the way you treat other people.
But when there are really egregious acts, so in other words, there are two, remember I said two ways, so it's cumulative. There's not enough equality, respect. Keep at it and we sort of forget, or we misjudge, or we do exactly what we do when we meet men. Are we really listening, or are we just thinking he's attractive? Because people will tell you who they are if you really listen. So, you know, yes.
What is the positive side of estranging? You said that these women these days.
What is positive is that you are set free from the burden of a friendship that really is unhappy and unhealthy, and that you have more clarity about yourself, and hopefully for the new friendships. It really opens up the door to new friendships that will suit you better. And a lot of the excuses had to do with the history. A lot of the women said, well, you know, we grew up together, or we were roommates in grad school, or our mothers were friends. Or, you know, she helped me during a terrible time, even though she just did something really terrible. But in a terrible time in the past, she was there for me. So lots of reasons why we stay. But yeah, estrangement, that's what's trending. That estrangement is really positive and it sets you free. Yeah.
So I have a question about the ghosting you mentioned.
About
The ghosting?
Yeah.
Could you explain that a little bit more, say what you heard from women about that process? Of
Because,
rejection?
right,
of
so
the
she
feedback?
asked about ghosting. And she said, you know, how does that play out? Really interesting how many women wanted to distance themselves by ghosting. They didn't want the confrontation, they didn't want to accuse, they didn't want to be accused of anything that had happened. But they needed out, so they, and with, you know, our phones and texting, how our phones are like attached to us, it was pretty apparent pretty quickly that that friend was no longer there for you. Or friends would cancel plans, that's another method. A lot of the women, all different ages, said, you know, I just stopped making plans, or I canceled plans till she understood. So maybe not so courageous, but definitely happening. Also icing, you know, to be very icy, to no longer be warm. It's another, so you get the message. But no one really wanted to sit down, except for one interview, which I want to mention because I found it really fascinating. These women, they're probably in their 30s now, in the book. They were raised in a very strict religious community. And they even went to a college that was like that. And then they grew apart because one friend married the proper man for the pedagogy, right? And she was having children right away, and this one left for a big city, turned her back on it, said, I really question it. I want to have sex before marriage. I want to have a life before marriage. Right, and this other friend had a whole family. And there are two stories like this, but the one I put in the book was where they finally, and this is apropos of ghosting, they finally, after lots of drama and real psychic pain, because they really loved each other, and she talks about that, they finally said to each other, you know what, let's divorce. Let's really admit that we're not friends anymore. And very few women reported that. That's why I have a whole section on ghosting. Because it takes courage, and it's very final. It's really very final, and so that's, you know, not common.
Do you find that women, the women that you interviewed in urban settings, have a different feeling about close friends or friends because it's an urban setting and there's so many options, and also maybe women in, although we all need to have besties or very close people, there's more women who are living in cities might have developed more independence than women in maybe suburban areas.
What they talk about, a lot of the women, is the loneliness. There's this whole sweet
there's what?
Loneliness.
Yeah.
And of course, being lonely in friendships when it's not working, just like it's lonely in a romance when it's not working. But I didn't see differences because women, surprisingly, wherever they are, end up wanting the same things. That's why, I don't know if I said this, but it doesn't matter if you went to Harvard and got your MBA or you hardly got out of high school or junior college. If you are unhappy with your female friends, if your workers are really unkind, if you hate your mother-in-law, if you're unhappily married, if you're having an affair, if your daughter is very difficult, these are all emotional needs for women, and they really are across the board. So what women do talk about is the groups that they find, and women define different groups, and you obviously can have many more groups in a city, but they do a pretty good job of it. I mean, there are bowling leagues and tennis leagues and Pilates classes that women go to together. The women are always looking to belong, and women always want to be heard and understood, just by nature. And then again, in a patriarchy, we really need to be recognized.
Do you feel that way, you think?
So,
I didn't hear the question, Barry.
she asked if men feel the same.
Oh.
So, in all these books, I mean, in the aggregate, I've interviewed thousands of women. I've never interviewed a man. So the only, I've had the opportunity and said no. And what's so interesting about it is that, if I pitch these, if I pitch these ideas to an editor about men, they would be pamphlets, not books. Because men have,
Don't talk about feelings.
men don't really talk, and men operate in a different way. So the only way I can report about men is as the men are reported to me by the women I speak with. And there's a lot of that in here, because women say, oh, my husband, my partner, my fiance, my ex-boyfriend. Women really do talk about it. And then of course in the stories where there's been great betrayal, and it's a triangle, I'm hearing about the man. One woman said, this is a young woman, after her best friend had slept with her husband, got pregnant, and this is really, the truth is stranger than fiction. She said, I would never talk to him again, but I wonder about her often. And that really underscores how close these relationships are.
So how did she wondered about her often, meaning
She wondered about the friend whom she's not speaking
Not the
to.
husband.
Yeah.
But she didn't care about the man at all. Just saying.
That would be very interesting if you did men, because I suggested to my husband, who's retired, that he go to the 92nd Street Y.
Where I
And he
swim
met
every
with the
day.
director and the whole thing, and they said, oh, we have this men's group and they'll be so wonderful for you and they'll be inclusive. He came home, he said, I felt so left out. They knew each other forever and they didn't include me.
Which
So
days?
that sounds very female.
And he's a very, Lewis said he had been friendly forever.
Well,
forever.
the one thing I want to
He's an
say,
outgoing guy.
well, women can be very clannish. And apparently in this instance, the men are too. And that's not good, and we need to learn to include and not be exclusive. We really need to. Oh.
How did you select your population?
So, years ago when I started out, it was so long ago that I actually asked cousins and friends across the country to put ads up in like Women's Wives, like the remember bulletin boards? And I put a hotline into my home. now, all these years later, I advertise on Craigslist. And then I network. So whenever I speak with a woman, I say, do you have a friend or a sister who is...
You also ask friends. You also ask friends.
Yeah, I sometimes do, but not too often. I try not to.
What did you find the difference? There's strange and estranging, right? Like, if there's a crisis, then you estrange. But when women sort of drift apart, what did you find was the key to when they finally ended the friendship versus putting up with some estrangement? So you become different. So one has this, one has
It
that.
really depends on your threshold.
That's what I wanted to
It's
ask
totally,
about.
that is totally about threshold, but what I was looking for was where it really blew up.
Yes.
When it was really a breakup. But a lot of women actually, in telling about their estranged story, would say, you know, I have other friends where I tolerate them, but this friend, there was so much trust. She
Yeah.
so betrayed me.
Yeah, yeah.
She
That's
so
clear.
lied, you know.
Mhm.
So we're talking really, you know, serious acts of betrayal.
Susan, thank you for a fascinating talk. Thank you all for coming. If you'd like, there are books in the back if you'd like to purchase one, if you'd like to come up